you doing, Karan?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, give me a hand. Always good to share the stage with another Aussie.
That's right. I was just thinking the same. Did you have your avocado on toast this morning?
I did not, but anyway, I didn't have any Vegemite here either. But anyway, let's kick it off. Why don't you tell? Well, firstly, tell us how another Aussie ended up here in London, and what was the sort of the thinking behind NayaOne?
Yeah, cool. Good to be here. So, how did an Aussie end up in London? Most likely how a lot of Brits end up in Australia. It was change of scenery. So I used to work for an Australian bank, and a role came up to basically run their tech for Europe and Americas. So I thought, you know what, do the expat thing, come over for 2 years, travel Europe, do your job, kind of go back. That was almost 7-8 years ago, and that's usually what happens. So as part of running the tech for that bank, it was all end-to-end operations. But it occurred to me, so if you think about the scene 7-8 years ago, or even 5 years ago, there was a macro scene change where a lot of banks and fintechs were headbutting and kind of went from competition to co-opetition, right? Mm-hmm. So wanting to collaborate a lot more. So both sides realized actually we could accelerate both businesses by partnering with each other rather than trying to outdo each other. Mm-hmm. So great, and there's a lot of good tech in UK, Europe, and America. So why don't we send that back to Sydney? That would be great. So you do what anyone does or did at that time, set up an innovation lab, right? So I had the discretionary funds, to bring the innovation in-house to help the product teams. Had really motivated business. Had the whole tech team to support me. And what I found was when I was bringing in tech, it just kind of came to a ground halt. But no fault of anybody. Mm-hmm. It's just banks are a regulated institution, so you can't just willy-nilly bring tech in. You need to go through the proper process of due diligence, the supplier party risk. But there's a key difference. The key difference is I'm not sure yet if I want to buy that tech.
Right.
Right. I just want to evaluate. I just want to make sure that it is actually fit for my business use. It's fit from a technology landscape that I have, and for that, I just need to make sure that it's a well-functioning company. But actually, I don't need their SOC 2 security reports at this or their BCP plans, so I don't need to go through the onboarding. So anyway, long story short, I came up with that challenge. I thought I was doing it wrong because it's the first time I was playing in the innovation landscape as a traditional IT folk. So I called up a couple of CTO friends and CIO friends. I'm like, hey, are you guys working with fintechs? We started, or are you just busy destroying them kind of thing, or rebuilding their products? And the answer was no. We're trying to bring them in, and it's a significant problem to bring tech providers into the bank from an evaluation and selection process, okay? So by the end, I would have spoken to about 50 CIOs and CTOs, and then as I was going through those conversations, it kind of dawned on me. It's like, hang on, I think this is an industry-wide problem.
Right.
So that's when I came across the concept of Sandbox, mm-hmm. And that's where Sandbox was born.
Right. Okay. So then maybe we can dig into that a little bit and just maybe talk about how it works and how it does actually make things so much faster.
Yeah, sure. So as part of that journey, I looked at a number of sandboxes that were already in the market. Mm-hmm. And what I found was, what is a sandbox? Sandbox is a technical environment where you can bring technology in and see if it's a good fit for you at a very basic level, right? So you could, for argument's sake, you could spin up any of the cloud environments and do the same thing. And that's what some of the, banks were doing 5-6 years ago. But the challenges with them, and I'll get to what our sandbox looks like, were that it still didn't have the governance layer or the control function around it, which made banks, not so comfortable with it. There's no billing controls, for example, no governance, no data leakage protection. So then when we created the NayaOne sandbox, we put 4 things in it, 4 main components. First thing was a marketplace of tech providers. Now, it's different to a directory listing of tech providers, because for that you've got Google and your network to find out who you need to work with. The tech providers on our marketplace are actually technically integrated into our platform. which means you log into NayaOne once, and you'll be able to access 150 plus different tech providers, ranging from the emerging techs to all the way to listed companies, to see if they're a good fit for your business capability. When in a bank or a financial services institution, once you've got the tech provider, your second biggest challenge is data sets and not having access to data to actually see how it would work.
Right.
So that's the second component that we've built into the Sandbox, which is the data marketplace. So it's got close to 200 different data sets, synthetic, public data sets, as well as data service providers. And what that means is they're industry relevant. They're used by regulators, they're used by central banks, they're used by other peer high street banks and asset managers and wealth managers, so you know what data sets you're leveraging, and our customers are more than welcome to bring their own data sets into it.
Right.
The third pillar is the technical environments, which is the thing that's out there in the market.
Yep.
that everyone has access to through a cloud provider. What we've done with that is we've taken that and we've applied air gap security, governance controls, data leakage protection to that, to make sure that it's safe and secure from a bank and a regulated entity point of view. The last thing is, which is so simple, so I don't want to call it the secret sauce. If we've brought it all together.
Right.
How a banking user, may it be an innovation team, a product team, a technology team, who would look at technology providers to solve a business outcome, right? So that's the Sandbox, and which is so at NayaOne we've got two offerings, which is the digital Sandbox and Fintech as a service. So in the Sandbox we talk about discover and evaluate, and then we talk about scaling to production using Fintech as a
Right,
service.
so can you maybe just take us through an example, either a real life one with, I don't know if you can name names or not, it doesn't really matter, but just take us through an example of how a bank can kind of use your system, and what are some of the use cases they're actually doing to make it so much quicker?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of, let me cover the areas we play in. So it's technology and domain agnostic, but the strengths. So the strengths are payments, financial crime, ESG, and we're building out a big digital asset ecosystem, which I'll talk about, and open banking. So those are the big five, but there's everything else in the middle. Let me think of two quick examples. So one would be someone wanting to evaluate a lending tech provider. Typically what would happen is they'll go, okay, I need a lending tech to address my business outcome. They would go to the market, they'll find out who they want to work with. They'll then go through the process of finding all the right people inside the organization to onboard them. Then they'll go to the tech team, get some infrastructure, go through the cloud, the security, and the architecture team, how to bring this person, this company in. And then they'll do a proof of concept, and then they'll go through the normal process of yay or nay. Now, in our experience, that process is 9 to 12 months. That's what it takes as an average. Now, if the same bank was using NayaOne, they would log in, they'll go to the marketplace, they'll, provided they've onboarded NayaOne, they'll type in lending tech, they'll see all the companies that are there. They'll select one or two companies they want to work with. Let's assume the company they originally wanted to work with is not there. They will send them an invite to get on board, and they can be onboarded in less than a week to an agreed standard. And then they're able to spin up technical environments, give them the same data, define the same requirements, agree the same outcomes across all three different vendors. And then run that proof of concept. An average time that it takes a proof of concept to get up and running is less than a week. And that includes a lot of back and forth between KPIs, between banks and vendors. Now, the difference is, from a time point of view, the bank is able to look at 3 vendors and not one, so they're not pinning all their hopes on one. They're able to get there in a week as compared to 9 months. And when they're going through the process, they're able to compare the outcome of those 3 vendors from an apples to apples perspective, because they're all in the same environment with the same data, with the same KPIs and requirements. So from an impact point of view, it's time, it's cost, because now I also haven't engaged the 14 teams that I need to get sign off from. And thirdly, the decision I'm making on the lending tech provider is so much more confident because I've looked at
Right.
3 different capabilities. It also satisfies my procurement requirement to look at 3 different vendors before I make that decision. So typically what we find is you got to that point, you've got to a decision in 80% less time. At that point, you can activate the procurement process and you can activate the product team working with the vendor to build it out, which means the whole point of doing this is to get the product in the customer's hand faster, right?
Right.
So that you've shaved about 12 months off that process to get the product to market. Because we find you have an idea, you go through the whole process, but by the time you get product to market, it's 2 to 3 years, right? Sometimes quicker, and the reality is the market's starting to shift by that point, especially these days.
Yeah, for sure. So then let's talk about digital assets and the move from sort of Web 2 to Web 3, because that's obviously a move that many companies are thinking about, and they really need to have some sort of test environment because it's so new. So tell us a little about the ecosystem that you're about to launch and how that works.
Yeah, so we spoke to close to 200 different digital asset and Web3 type companies. And I'd say Web3 because it's still such a new idea, and there is a pocket of companies that are kind of signaling Web3, but there's nothing Web3 about them.
Right.
So what we've done is we've kind of broken that into a bit of a value chain, and just at a high level, we look at custody and solutions that sit around the custody proposition, a lot of tokenization, and a lot of financial crime related type capability,
right,
and distribution. So if you think about those are the 4 areas we're focused on. We've got about, speaking to the team yesterday, we've got about 35 odd companies that are already on the stack, and we're kind of finalizing who the companies we're going to launch with. But the idea is, to your point, banks who are exploring this space or active in this space or have been building on some of the enterprise blockchains for a while would basically go, okay, but that can't just operate on its own. I need to replicate my Web 2 in Web 3 and make sure it interoperates. So for that, you need a lot of tech, right? So there's a big thing about fragmentation in not just the digital asset ecosystem, but just in the ecosystem in general, and interoperability between different tech is the key. So they come to the platform and they go, right, well, I've picked my custody solution, right? But from a custody solution point of view, what else do I need? Okay, what do I need for financial crime? I've got new assets coming, and that company's really good on tokenizing the housing market, for example, or the real estate. And how does it feed back into my general ledger, right? As an example. So doing all that could take a number of years.
Right.
But you could go to NayaOne. We've got a number of custody solutions there. We've got a number of core systems that it plugs into, so you can test the interoperability. And you basically do your kind of like your mock environment, and you can flush through transactions, and you can see how it would flow. And I think, so we started off as enabling tech, but really where we're finding most success is enabling product outcomes, as well as making risk and compliance teams more comfortable, because they can see it, they can feel it, they can see it end to end. They can assess the risk, not just for that project or for that system. They're able to see what a transaction flow would look like for a particular asset.
Right. And then when we chatted last week, you talked about this concept, which I thought was really interesting. You talked about what you're really creating in some ways is open banking for the crypto world. So
yeah,
maybe just, can you sort of tease that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, and I retracted very quickly.
I kept it though, because I think it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it is, and the intention of saying that is basically connecting once into many, right?
Right.
So with open banking, there was, you're basically aggregating a lot of banks into one open banking provider, and then providing that to different people who want to build products on top. So in a way, we're similar. We're aggregating a lot of different tech providers,
right,
that we're giving to people who want to build new products, not just on top of the open banking. So in the platform, we've got close to 8, if not 10, different open banking providers as such. The other way to look at it, if you're from a capital markets background, is the ECN, which is the Electronic Communication Network, which is typically a markets business would go into a hub and then connect to different pricing providers. So it's a similar sort of concept. You know, our customers go into NayaOne once, and they're able to access different ecosystems of tech providers to see what's going to help them, maybe uplifting their ESG posture, evaluating which digital asset companies are good for them to build products.
So say more about the ESG piece, because that, how are you working with companies on that? Is that, are they able to evaluate how ESG these companies are? I mean, obviously you've got the data sets you talked about. Maybe just tease that out a little bit too.
Yeah, so there's a number of use cases that clients work with us on. So one is we've done a number of value chains. So it might be around the investment and risk piece. There's about 25 companies in an investment and risk portfolio point of view that can help update your ESG posture on that space. The second one is, for example, is carbon foot tracking, so on the retail side, right? And again, about 25 companies there. So what happens is banks or asset managers will go in there and basically go, okay, well, this is what my current stack looks like, and if I looked at this value chain, here's the gaps, and they'll pick and choose the companies, construct the journey, and see what ESG outcome for their own company reporting they could generate, because that's like one thing. The other one is portfolio enrichment, so ability to test 5 different vendors to see what performs best on your portfolio. The other one is creating ESG relevant or carbon foot tracking education for retail clients, for example. But we're also seeing, and we also have a lot of tech providers that would help you kind of do a bit of ESG score on the company itself and different elements. So it would be like an ESG company score. It would be what's the ESG score of your track of your tech stack.
Right.
So it's going in lots of different spaces.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So we are getting a few questions coming in here. Let's start to go through some of these. Sounds like NayaOne is a marketplace of tech. As you build the company, do you face classic marketplace challenges of balancing buyers and sellers on the platform?
Yeah, interesting question. So if we go to the core principle of NayaOne and the tech marketplace, so we built this to enable product for the financial services enterprise to make sure that consumers are getting best products in a fast manner. For tech providers to come onto the marketplace, it's free. We don't charge, so you can't buy your way into the marketplace. One thing is common amongst everybody who's on the marketplace is that their tech works. So we kind of weed out the PowerPoints.
That's a good thing.
And we have periodic number of times a day check that the tech is up and running. So we do a level of due diligence, and if a bank's bringing somebody in, we follow their standards to do that. So yeah, from a buyer's point of view, so in terms of who's on the marketplace, there's inbound, there's if we're doing ecosystems, but the majority of the people on the marketplace are requested by our clients.
Right. And so when they release something new, how quickly does it get up onto your platform? Because obviously these companies are all upgrading their software from time to time.
Yeah, so integration and maintenance nightmare was part of the core principles. It's instant as soon as they release it. The way we've set it up is it's updated, straight away.
Okay, excellent.
So if they release it to market, it gets updated.
Right. And then are you obviously working with different cloud providers? I presume that's a fairly trivial problem for you guys to have, you can go and test someone from AWS with someone from Azure and someone.
Yeah, so we're cloud agnostic.
Google.
That's actually one of the use cases why clients work with us, because they're like, I can only test an AWS company because my current environment is AWS or GCP or Azure for that matter. And it's like, okay, well, if you get into NayaOne, it's a NayaOne managed platform. It doesn't matter where it's hosted. Obviously, they know where it's hosted, but they can bring in any company that's hosted anywhere. Okay,
so here's one. How is the IP protected?
Great question.
In the NayaOne platform?
Great question.
Yes.
And it comes up every time. So if you think about bank and a tech company wanting to work together, especially in the data analytics or AI space, the first question that everyone asks is, how is my IP protected from both sides? Because there's a myth or a reality in the market, depending where you are, about if I show the bank how this works, they're just going to go and build it themselves, right? And sometimes that is true. Because it's a neutral environment and it's NayaOne managed, banks aren't able to get under the hood unless you give them permission to.
Right.
Okay. So they're there to evaluate the capability. We've had in the digital asset space where we deployed a whole, stablecoin company, bunch of different nodes between different banks, and one of the banks wanted to go, I want to see how we deploy it, how we get to performance, and they couldn't do that unless we had the consent and agreement from the vendor to let them have access to that. So that's at that level. The second point is, in general, like if you and I are having a conversation and you had a great idea and then I went ahead and built it about the IP, which is, we encourage both banks and fintechs, so while we've got contracts with both of them, to have an NDA and an IP agreement before they start doing anything, which is just good hygiene.
And then I imagine for those banks that they probably don't need to look under the hood initially, but once they go, okay, this one is really interesting to us, we now need to look under the hood. Do they?
Correct.
They then you were able then to update their permissions?
Yeah, because they go, okay, we're going to start with 3 AI companies. Okay, 2 of them are okay, but this one really hits the mark. Now so we made a decision that this is the one that we're going to go with, but I need to look at one more thing. Can bring in the vendor and basically go through the detail. Right. And at that point, IP documents are put in place.
Okay, another one here is, how is due diligence accomplished for regulatory compliance? A RegTech solution, question mark.
I'm trying to understand that question.
I mean, I guess...
how is due diligence accomplished for regulatory compliance?
Yeah, so I guess how are you set up with, are the regulators, have they approved your sandbox? Is everything kind of set up for FCA compliance?
Yeah, so FCA is a customer of ours.
Right.
But as any regulator, they would not endorse a product.
Yeah, well, they have their own.
They use the product to run their own sandbox, and that is where the regulatory compliance comes in. We're a tech infrastructure product, so I think that's why I'm confused by the question, because the regulatory compliance happens with the regulator. We wouldn't touch that. But the platform has elements that the regulator needs to make their job easier. If the question was around how do we meet the due diligence that the banks are looking for, so if you've onboarded to more than number of banks, you know that questionnaire is about 80-90% the same, right? So we've taken a light version of that and based on experience extracted things that matter, and that's what gets used to onboard the companies. And most banks that we onboard as customers would add a couple more questions, and that's their questionnaire.
Right, gotcha. Okay, another interesting question here. How long do banks take to mirror their environments into NayaOne?
That's a great question. So typically the way it works is we'll pick a business unit and we'll work with them, and we'll get a number of their products and their core products happening within that. It really comes down to how far down the line the bank is in itself to have, bring their, let's call them UAT APIs into the sandbox. Or, there was a customer 2 months ago where they were working with a large CRM provider, and it was a brand new implementation. So actually they brought in off-the-shelf CRM into the sandbox. They brought in a core banking implementation into the platform, and all the new product development they were doing was actually in the sandbox, and that was getting pushed out into the CRM, into the core bank, and into the product from there. So it really comes down to how advanced the organization is in terms of the infrastructure they already have, or the API strategy they have, but also If you don't have anything and they're starting from scratch, it could be instant.
Right.
But I'd say the key point there is start small, pick an area, don't go mapping the whole bank into the sandbox, because that's a recipe for not achieving much.
Right, okay. So that's a little bit of a similar type question, but when a bank decides to go steady with a certain vendor, what happens next? What is the handoff like?
What's a go steady, Jim?
I mean, like they're dating. They're dating.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So they're interested, but they're not committed.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. That's more human problem, but I totally hear that, which is what we kind of call it leading down the garden path, kind of waiting for that date to happen. So the way we've structured that orchestration, that fourth piece that I was referring to, out of the box, we put milestones for the banks, because all of them are looking to improve their speed of execution, their speed of innovation, and how much they're executing. So things like, when was the NDA initiated versus when the NDA was done versus when the data was ready, when the pilot was. So they're all kind of staged. That we've found enables a lot of teams internally to stay on top of it, but also to cut out the time wasters. Because the simple question out of the box is, who's the sponsor for this? So you're not just having fun, but there's if this was successful, there's someone willing to buy this product at the end.
Right, okay. What advice would you give a Web3 founder who wants to penetrate traditional financial institutions?
That's a long conversation.
It is.
I'd say seek out the banks who are serious in that space, and there are a few of them here, definitely yesterday, and I've seen a few this morning. And finding the people who are active in this space, they know where to press, because the ecosystem's still pretty young, which also creates a bit of confusion. But people who've been operating in this space for even as little as a year know who's who and what's what. And finding those people out is probably the best bet. They would help you navigate the traditional financial institutions.
Right.
Because at a banking level, everyone is watching it from far at the moment. There's a few, so there's, it's a clear divide in my head, and I don't know if you feel the same. There's a category of banks who are ready with their tanks, ready to go, waiting for regulations to drop, and they will be just dishing out product. And they're a little bit in the institutional space. In the retail space, is a lot more. I'm just going to wait and see, especially in the UK when you've got consumer duty coming out next year or this year.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think there's more in that second camp than the first camp. Hopefully, we'll get the regulatory landscape. A little bit more clarity would help a lot. But so then, what's the long game here? Because you connect these banks and fintechs together, and once they're connected, they're in production. I imagine they no longer do they still need the NayaOne ecosystem to sort of test new products, but maybe even just step back a little bit and talk about what are you planning? What's the vision for where you're taking this?
Yeah. Great question. So, two questions there. Great.
I know
two great questions. So, in terms of do banks still need NayaOne once they've done their experimentation? Yeah. If you look at the change cycle in the bank, that never goes down. That's always it's there all the time, right? Yeah. So it might be one business unit this year, it might be a second business unit next year, and third business unit next year. So there's always change going on. And from a macro climate point of view, it's really hard to hire talent. I don't need to say that. Everyone knows it. So the bank shifted from buy versus build to a couple of years ago. And right now, they're tripling down on it because there's no way they can get product out to market in time. So that kind of fuels our business, because we're kind of making that, find the right partner you want to work to get your product out to market sooner. So it kind of fuels that. So I don't see that requirement going away.
Right.
The other thing is the whole embedded finance and Web3 space, right, which are both enabling, you need a number of different businesses to work together to enable the embedded experience. Right. Again, the whole interoperability and connecting to each other. So that's core to our business. So I don't see that going away. And more, we're having people test a number of companies together in a use case, not just one company to evaluate that. Right. The long game is hopefully get to a point where experimentation is so easy and it could be made available at masses. And we just focus on Fintech as a service, which is, right, this is the product I want to get to market. Okay, plus it comes with Sandbox and data sets. Right, so rather than kind of educate the market, how can you get your product to production faster or to your customers faster? It's like, okay, we know we can do that because there's enough people in the market doing this. And then we work backwards. Right. And you kind of go, okay, I need to create that embedded experience. I go to NayaOne, I pick the right people, throw in a couple of ESG providers and see what that looks like as an overall product offering. And by the way, it comes with Sandbox, so I can actually try them out.
That's true. It's a good place to end it. Well, it's a global challenge. It's not just here in the UK. Obviously, this is a challenge all over the world. So
that's true.
Good luck to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Good questioning. Thanks, you.
Man.
Cheers.
See ya.